I'm so sorry, that was my neighbor. I'm just waiting to see if my listener will come back. Okay, I'm just gonna continue. This is St. Petersburg. Goshen's 10 miles further up the river. Who told you this was Goshen? Why, a man I met at daybreak this morning, just as I was going to turn into the woods for my regular sleep. He told me when the roads forked I must take the right hand and 5 miles would fetch me to Goshen. He was drunk, I reckon. He told you exactly wrong. Well, he did act like he was drunk. But it ain't no matter now. I got to be moving along. I'll fetch Goshen before daylight. Hold on a minute. I'll just put you up a snack to eat. You might want it. So she put me up a snack and says, Say, when a cow's laying down, which end of her legs gets up first? Answer up prompt now, so don't stop to study over it. Which end gets up first? The hind end, Mum. Well then, a horse? The forward end, Mum. Which side of a tree does the moss grow on? North side. If 15 cows is browsing on a hillside, how many of them eats with their heads pointed the same direction? The whole 15, Mum. Well, I reckon you have lived in the country. I thought maybe you was trying to hocus me again. What's your real name now? George Peters, Mum. Hello, sorry for the interruption. Well, try to remember it, George. Don't forget and tell me it's Alexander before you go, and then get out by saying it's George Alexander when I catch you. And don't go about women in that old calico. You do a girl tolerable poor when you might fool men maybe. Bless you, child. When you set out to threaten a needle, don't hold the thread still and fetch the needle up to it. Hold the needle still and poke the thread at it. That's the way a woman almost always does it. But a man always does the other way. And when you throw at a rat or anything, hitch yourself up a tiptoe and fetch your hand up over your head as awkward as you can, and miss your rat about 6 or 7 foot. Throw stiff-armed from the shoulder, like there was a pivot there you for it to turn on, like a girl, not from the wrist and elbow with your arm out to one side like a boy. And mind you, when a girl tries to catch anything in her lap, she throws her knees apart. She don't clap them together the way you did when you catch a lump of lead. Why, I spotted you for a boy when you was threading the needle, and I can try the other things just to make certain. Now trot along to your uncle, Sarah Mary Williams, George Alexander Peters, and if you get into trouble, you send word to Mrs. Judith Loftus, which is me, and I'll do what I can to get you out of it. Keep the river road all the way, and next time you tramp, take shoes and socks with you. The river road's rocky one, and your feet will be in a condition when you get to Goshen, I reckon. I went up the bank about 50 yards, and then I doubled on my tracks and slipped back to where my canoe was, a good piece below the house. I jumped in and was off in a hurry. I went upstream far enough to make the head of the island, and then started across. I took off the sunbonnet, for I didn't want no blinders on then. When I was about the middle I heard the clock begin to strike, so I stopped and listened. The second came faint over the water but clear, 11. When I struck the head of the island I never waited to blow, though I was most winded, but I shoved right into the timber where my old camp used to be, and started a good fire there on the high and dry spot. Then I jumped in the canoe and dug out for a place, a mile and a half below, as hard as I could go. I landed and slopped through the timber up the ridge and into the cavern. There Jim laid, sound asleep on the ground. I roused him out and says, "Get up and hump yourself, Jim. There ain't no minute to lose. They're after us." Jim never asked no questions. He never said a word, but the way he worked for the next half an hour showed about how he was scared. By that time everything we had in the world was in our raft, and she was ready to be shoved out from the willow cove where she was laid. We put out the camp at the cavern. We put out the campfire at the cavern the first thing and didn't show a candle outside after that. I took the canoe out from the shore a little piece and shook and take a look, but there was a boat around. I couldn't see it. If there was a boat around, I couldn't see it, for stars and shadows ain't no good to see by. Then we got out to the raft and slipped along down the shade, past the foot of the island, dead still, never saying a word. Chapter 12. It must have been close to 1 o'clock when we got below the island at last, and the raft did seem to go mighty slow. If a boat was to come along, we was going to take the canoe and break for the Illinois shore. But it was well a boat didn't come, for we hadn't ever thought to put the gun in the canoe, or a fishing line, or anything to eat. We was in rather too much of a sweat to think of so many things. It weren't good judgment to put everything on the raft. If the men went to the island, I just expect they found the campfire I built, and watched it all night for Jim to come. Anyways, they stayed away from us, and if my building the fire never fooled them, it weren't no fault of mine. I played it as low down on them as I could. When the first streak of day began to show, we tied up to a towhead in a big bend on the Illinois side, and hacked off cottonwood branches with a hatchet. I covered up the raft with them so that she looked like there had been a cave in the bank there. A towhead is a sandbar that has cottonwood on it as thick as harrow teeth. We had mountains on the Missouri shore and heavy timber on the Illinois side, and the channel was down the Missouri shore at that place, so we weren't afraid of anybody running across us. We laid there all day and watched the rafts and steamboats spin down the Missouri shore, and up bound the steamboats fight the big river in the middle. I told Jim all about the time I had jabbering with that woman, and Jim said she was a smart one, and if she was to start after us herself, she wouldn't sit down and watch a campfire. No, sir, she'd fetch the dog. Well, then, I said, why couldn't she tell her husband to fetch a dog? Jim said he based she did think of it by the time the men was ready to start, and he believed they must have gone uptown to get a dog, and so they lost all that time, or else we wouldn't be here on a towhead 16 or 17 mile below the village. No, indeedy, we would be in that same old town again, and so I didn't care what was the reason they didn't get us as long as they didn't. When it was beginning to come on dark, we poked our heads out of the cottonwood thicket and looked up and down across. Nothing in sight. So Jim took up some of the top planks of the raft and built a snug wigwam to get under in blazing weather and rainy, and to keep things dry. Jim made a floor for the wigwam and on raised it a foot or more above the level of the raft. So now the blankets and all the traps was out of reach of the steamboat waves. Right in the middle of the wigwam we made a layer of dirt about 5 or 6 inches deep, with a frame around it for to hold to its place. This was to build a fire in sloppy weather or chilly. The wigwam would keep it from being seen. We made an extra steering oar too, because one of the others might get broke on a snag or something. We fixed up a short forked stick to hang the old lantern on, because we must always light the lantern whenever we see a steamboat coming downstream, to keep it from getting run over. But we wouldn't have to light it up for steamboats unless we see we was in what they call a crossing, for the river was pretty high yet, very low banks being still a little under water. So we upbound boats, didn't always run the channel, but hunted easy water. The second night we run between 7 and 8 hours, with a current that was making over 4 mile an hour. We catched fish and talked, and we took a swim now and then to keep off sleepiness. It was kind of solemn, drifting down the big still river, laying on our backs, looking up at the stars, and we didn't ever feel like talking loud. And it weren't often that we laughed, only a little kind of low chuckle. We had mighty good weather as a general thing, and nothing ever happened to us at all, that night, nor the next, nor the next. Every night we passed towns, some of them away up on black hillsides, nothing but just a shiny bed of lights, not a house could you see. The fifth night we passed St. Louis, and it was like the whole world lit up. In St. Petersburg they used to say there was 20 or 30,000 people in St. Louis, but I never believed it till I see what wonderful spread of lights at 2 o'clock that still night. There weren't a sound there. Everybody was asleep. Every night now I used to slip ashore towards 10 o'clock at some little village, and buy 10 or 15 cents worth of meal or bacon and other stuff to eat. And sometimes I lifted a chicken that weren't roosting comfortable and took him along. Pop always said take a chicken when you can get a chance, because if you don't want him yourself, you can easily find somebody who that does, and a good deed ain't ever forgot. I never see Pop when he didn't want the chicken himself, but that is what he used to say anyway. Mornings before daylight, I slipped into cornfields and borrowed a watermelon or a marshmallow or a pumpkin or something corn of or things of that kind. Bob always said it weren't no harm to borrow things if you was meaning to put them back sometime, but the widow said it weren't anything but a soft name for stealing, and no decent body would do it. Jim said he reckoned the widow was partly right and Bob was partly right, so the best way he would be for us to pick out 2 or 3 things from the list and say we wouldn't borrow them any more, and then he reckoned it wouldn't be no harm to borrow the others. So we talked it over all one night, drifting along down the river, trying to make up our minds whether to drop the watermelons or the cantaloupes or the marshmallows or what. Towards the daylight, we got all set we got all settled satisfactorily and concluded to drop crab apples and persimmons. We weren't feeling just right before that, but it was all comfortable now. I was glad the way it came out too, because crab apples ain't ever good, and the persimmons wouldn't be ripe for 2 or 3 months yet. We shot a waterfowl now and then that got up too early in the morning, or didn't go to bed early enough in the evening. Take it all round, we lived pretty high. The fifth night now, below St. Louis, we had a big storm after midnight, with a power of thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in a solid street. We stayed in the Wickham and let the raft take care of itself. When the lightning glared out, we could see a big straight river ahead and high rocky bluffs on both sides. By and by, says I, "Hello, Jim, looky yonder." It was a steamboat that had killed herself on a rock. She was drifting straight down for her. We was drifting straight down for her. The lightning showed her very distinct. She was leaning over with part of her upper deck above water, and you could see every little chimney guy clean and clear, and a chair by the big bow with an old slouched hat hanging on the back of it, with the flashes gum. Well, it being away in the night and stormy and all so mysterious like, I just felt the way any other boy would have felt when I see that wreck lying there, so mournful and lonesome in the middle of the river. I wanted to get aboard of her and slink around a little and see what there was there. So I says, "Let's land on her, Jim." But Jim was dead against it at first. He says, "I don't want to go full longer, no wreck. We's done blame well, and we better let blame well alone. And the good book says, like as not days a watchman or direct. Watchman, your grandmother," I says. "There ain't nothing to watch but the Texas and the pilot house. And do you reckon anybody's going to risk his life for a Texas and a pilot house such a night as this, when it's likely to break up and wash off down the river any minute?" Jim couldn't say nothing to that, so he didn't try. "And besides," I says, "we might borrow something worth having out of the captain's stateroom. Cigars, I bet you, and cost 5 cents apiece, solid cash. Steamboat captains is always rich and get $60 a month, and they didn't care that A cent what a thing costs, you know, long as they want it. Stick a candle in your pocket. I can't rest, Jim, till we give her a rummaging. Do you reckon Tom Sawyer would ever go buy this thing? Not for pie, he wouldn't. He'd call it an adventure, that's what he'd call it, and he'd land on that wreck as if it was his last act. And wouldn't he throw style into it? Wouldn't he spread himself know nothing? Why don't you think it was Christopher Columbus discovering Kingdom Come? I wish Tom Sawyer was here. Jim, he grumbled a little, but gave in. He said he mustn't talk any more than we could help, and then talk mighty low. The lightning showed us the wreck again just in time, and we fetched the starboard derrick and made fast there. The deck was high out here, and we went sneaking down the slope of it to larboard in the dark towards the Texas, feeling our way slow with our feet and spreading our hands out to fend off the guys, for it was so dark we couldn't see no sign of them. Pretty soon we struck toward end of the skylight and clumb onto it, and the next step fetched us in front of the captain's door, which was open, and by Jiminy, away down through the Texas hall we see a light, and all the same second we seem to hear low voices in yonder. Jim whispered and said he was feeling powerful sick, and told me to come along. I says all right, and was going to start for the raft, but just then I heard a voice wail out and say, "Oh, please don't, boys, I swear I won't ever tell." Another voice said pretty loud, "It's a lie, Jim Turner. You've acted this way before. You always want more'n your share of the truck, and you always got it too, because you swore you wouldn't. You didn't you tell. If you didn't you tell, but this time you've said it in jest one time too many. You're the meanest, treacherousest hound in this country." By this time Jim was gone for the raft. I was just a boiling with the curiosity, and I says to myself, Tom Sawyer wouldn't back out now, so I won't either. I'm a going to see what's going on there. So I dropped on my hands and knees in the little passage, and crept aft in the dark till there weren't, excuse me, but one stateroom betwixt me and Cross-Hall the Texas. Then in there I see a man stretched on the floor and tied hand and foot, and two men standing over him. The one of them had dim lantern in his hands, and the other one had a pistol. This one kept pointing the pistol at the man's head on the floor and saying, "I'd like to, and I ordered to. A mean skunk." The man on the floor would shrivel up and say, "Oh, please don't, Bill. I ain't going to tell." And every time he said that the man with the lantern would laugh and say, "'Deed you ain't. You never said no truer thing 'n that, I bet you." And once he said, "Hear him beg," and yet if he hadn't got the best of him and tied him he'd a killed us both. And what for? Just for nothing. Just because we stood on our rights. That's what's for. But I lay you ain't going to threaten nobody no more, Jim Turner. Put up that pistol, Bill. Bill says, "I don't want to, Jake Packard. I'm for killing him, but didn't he kill old Hatfield just the same way? And didn't and don't he deserve it? But I don't want him killed, and I've got my reasons for it." "Bless your heart for them words, Jake Packard. I'll never forget you as long I live, says the man on the floor, sort of blubbering. Packard didn't take no notice of that, but hung up his lantern on a nail and started towards where I was there in the dark, and motioned to Bill to come. I crawfished I crawfished as fast as I could about 2 yards, but the boat slanted so I couldn't make very good time. So to keep from getting run over and catched, I crawled into a stateroom on the upper side. The man came a-pawing along in the dock, and when Packard got to my stateroom, he says, "Here, come in here." And in he come, and Bill after him. But before they got in, I was up in the upper berth, cornered and sorry I come. Then they stood there with their hands on the ledge of the berth and talked. I couldn't see them, but I could tell where they was by the whisky they'd been having. I was glad I didn't drink whisky, but it wouldn't made such much a difference anyway, because most of the time they couldn't treat me because I couldn't breathe. I was too scared, and besides, a body couldn't breathe and hear much talk. They talked low and earnest. Bill wanted to kill Turner, he says. He said he'll tell, and he will. If he was to give both our shares to him now, it wouldn't make a difference after the row and the way we've served him. Sure's you're born he will turn state's evidence. Now you hear me. I'm putting him out of his troubles. So my, says Packard very quiet. Blame it, I'd sort of begun to think you wasn't. Well then, that's all right. Let's go and do it. Hold on a minute. I ain't had my saying yet. You listen to me. Shootin's no good. Oh, shootin's good, but there's quieter ways if the thing's got to be done. But what I say is this. It ain't good sense to go courtin' off around after a halter if you can get it at what you're up to in some way that's just as good and at the same time don't bring you into no risk. Ain't that so? You bet it is. But how you going to manage it this time? Well, my idea is this. We'll rustle around and gather up whatever pickings we've overlooked in the staterooms and shove for shore and hide the truck. Then we'll wait. Now I say ain't a going to be more'n 2 hours before this wreck breaks up and washes down the river, see? He'll be drowned and won't have nobody to blame for it but his own self. I reckon that's considerable sight of killing him. I'm unfavorable to killing a man as long as you can get around it. It ain't good sense, it ain't good morals. Ain't I right? Yes, I reckon you are. But suppose she don't break up and wash off? Well, we can wait the 2 hours anyway and see, can't we? All right then, come along. So they started all So they started and I let out, all in a cold sweat, and scrambled forward. It was dark as pitch there, but I said in a kind of coarse whisper, "Jim!" And he answered, right at my elbow with a sort of a moan, and I says, "Quick, Jim! It ain't no time for fooling around and moaning. There's a gang of murderers in yonder, don't and if we don't hunt up their boat and set their drifting down the river so these fellows can't get away from the wreck, there's one of them going to be in a bad fix. But if we find their boat and we can pull all of 'em in a bad fix, for the sheriff will get 'em quick. Hurry! I'll hunt the larboard side, and you hunt the starboard. You start at the raft, and Oh my lordy, lordy, Raff, there ain't no Raff no more. She done broke loose and gone, and here we is. Chapter 13. Thank you. Same to you. Well, I catched my breath and most fainted. Shut up on a wreck with such a gang as that. But it weren't no time to be sentimentering. We'd got to find that boat now. We have it for ourselves. So we went a quaking and shaking down the starboard side. And slow work as it was too, seemed a week before we got to the stern. No sight of the boat. Jim said he didn't believe he could go any further. So scared he hadn't hardly any strength left, he said. But I said, come on, if we get left on this wreck, we're in a fix. Sure. So on we prowled again. We struck for the stern of the Texas and found it, and then scrabbled along forwards on the skylight, hanging from shutter to shutter, for the edge of the skylight was in the water. When we got pretty close to the cross-hole door, there was a skiff sure enough. I just I could just barely see her. I felt ever so thankful. In another second I would been aboard of her, but just then the door opened, and one of the men stuck his head out only about couple of foot from me, so I thought I was gone. But he jerked in again and says, "Have that blame lantern out o' sight, Bill." He flung a bag of something into the boat and then got himself and sat down. It was Packard. And then Bill, he came out and got in. Packard says in a low voice, "All ready. Shove off." I couldn't hardly hang on to the shutters. I was so weak. But Bill says, "Hold on. Did you go through him?" "No, didn't you?" "No, so he's got his share of the cash yet. Well then, come along. No use to take truck and leave money. Say, won't he suspicion that we're up to? Maybe he won't, but he got to have it anyway. Come along." So they got out and went in. The door slammed to because it was on the careen side, and in a half second I was in the boat and Jim come tumbling after me. I out with my knife and cut the rope, and away we went. We didn't touch an oar, and we didn't speak nor whisper, nor hardly even breathe. We went gliding swift along dead silent, past the tip of the paddle box, and past the stern. Then in a second or more we was 100 yards below the wreck, and the darkness soaked her up, every last sign of her, and we was safe, and knowed it. When we was there or two When we was 3 or 400 yards downstream, we see the lantern show like a little spark at the Texas door for a second, and we knowed by that the rascals had missed their boat, and what was beginning to understand that they was in just as much trouble now as Jim Turner was. Then Jim manned the oars, and we took out after our raft. Now was the first time that I began to worry about the men. I reckon I hadn't had time to before. I begun to think how dreadful it was, even for murderers, to be in such a fix. I said to myself, there ain't no tellin' but I might come to be a murderer myself yet, and then how would I like it? So I says to Jim, "Yeah, rascals." So I says to Jim, "The first light we see will land 100 yards below it. or above it, in a place where it's a good hiding place for you and the skiff, and then I'll go and fix up some kind of yarn and get somebody to go for that gang and get them out of their scrape so they can be hung when their time comes. But that idea was a failure, for pretty soon it began to storm again, and this time worse than ever. The rain poured down and never a light showed. Everybody in bed, I reckon. We boomed along down the river, watching for lights and watching for our raft. Ever a long time the rain let up, but the crowd stayed, and the lightning kept whimpering. And by a flash showed us a black thing ahead floating, and we made for it. It was the raft, and mighty glad was we to get aboard of it again. We seen a light now away down to the right on shore, so I said I would go for it. The skiff was half full of plunder which that gang had stole there on the wreck. We hustled it on the raft in a pile and told Jim to float along down, and slowed a light and show a light when we judged he had gone about 2 mile, and keep it burning till I come. Then I manned my oars and shoved off for the light. When I got down towards it 3 or 4 more showed up on a hillside. It was a village. I closed in above the shore light and laid on my oars and floated. As I went by I see it was a lantern hanging on the jack-staff of a double-hull ferry-boat. I skimmed around for the watchman, a-wondering whereabouts he slept, and by I found him roosting on the bitts forward, with his head down between his knees. I gave his shoulder 1 or 2 little shoves and began to cry. He stirred up in a kind of startlish way, but when he see it was only me he took a good gap and stretched, and then he says, "Hello, what's up? Don't cry, bub. What's the trouble?" Thank you that we could sit together. I appreciate it. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I know that it's going to be okay. And if it's not, at least you're not alone anymore. And for that, I'm proud of you. If you need me again, I'll be back soon. Good night.